Good afternoon, Jason.
Hi, John. Thank you for having me here.
Thanks for being here. Jason's Awakening Alchemy approach is the first I've seen, and I think this is because you both have a deep grounding in Dhamma, but also a deep grounding in Chinese medicine and martial art, where you've been able to distill out what I feel is some of the essences of those Taoist articulations to support and map onto Buddhist samadhi practice in a way that feels simple, accessible, and so thank you so much, Jason, with that intro.
Thank you. Well, I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm just grateful to share some of these experiences with people and see if they're useful.
Before we begin, I'll give a brief biography, and then we'll ask questions. Jason Bartlett offers a practical, cross-traditional approach to the Buddha Dharma. His teaching centers on returning to nature, a system of releasing the sense of self by entrusting whatever arises, unbidden and uncontrolled, to nature itself, drawing on the Prajnaparamita, Tathagata, and early Taoist teachings. He began meditating in 1993 at age 17, expanding over the years across Chan, Korean, Song, Pure Land, Theravada practices, the Pali Suttas, and Mahayana Sutras. Following his brother's death in 2019, he founded Luminous Dharma, there's a website, luminousdhamma.org, dharma.org, to offer teachings freely. His mentors include Venerable Suchitta Mahateri, Santikaru Upasaka, Lee Brasington, and Venerable Wukai Shifu. So perhaps we might just begin by asking, how did Awakening Alchemy as an approach develop? How did you kind of begin coming to it what was your journey to having this as an approach?
Oh, let's see. I first was exposed to some of this material when I was about 16. And I had ADHD, and I had a very scattered experience of mind and a lot of restlessness in the body. And so my first martial arts teacher was a Japanese martial artist that also practiced some Zen and Shinto techniques and concepts. And he introduced me to some of these. And I think originally it was to try to just help me with focus and less restlessness, very likely to help him teach me. But when he had me do them, I felt the potential in it pretty quickly. And so I took it really seriously. And so I did it a lot. And initially, we can go into some of these further as we talk, but he had me for several years bring the attention to awareness of sensations in the belly as I did everything. Like, we would do martial arts that way, I would do tumbling that way, I would open a door that way, I would go on a jog that way, I would try to sit up from bed that way or sit down for dinner that way. And there was no goal he gave me for that. He just encouraged me to kind of put the mind there. And I just kept doing it. I found it seemed to do some good things, but he never painted an end point. So it just kind of developed. And then because of his influence and my exposure to Taoist practices, and in Japanese and Chinese martial arts, many times they are repositories for Taoist or related practices that maybe haven't been kept so well elsewhere, but they've been entrusted as part of the art and preserved. And so throughout the years, I was exposed to more of these things, and then knew that there was an interest to look for more of them. And working with them sincerely, they eventually developed into a system where some things didn't fit well and some things worked together. And since I was practicing Dharma this whole time, there were some things that didn't fit well and some things that fit together. And I was never looking to marry them, but I just found over time that they were interweaving in a really beautiful way and a really helpful way that sometimes I would have never known that it would have done that. And so I've continued, and hopefully will continue for the rest of my life, the exploration of these things, and finding out that the word Tao is quite similar to the word Dhamma or Dharma as a study of nature, and looking for just skillful ways to use what's possible. I guess that's kind of a fascination of mine.
So maybe we can begin by giving people some language, in particular the three key treasures. Would you talk about the three treasures?
Sure. So the three treasures are three layers of experience, we might say. And the first one is the essence level. And the essence level is like the very visceral body experience. It includes things like the bone marrow and the endocrine system and hormones and very physical, kind of sometimes wordless physical experiences would be in this layer. And then the second layer, qi, I keep that word in Chinese because I don't know of any one translation for it, but it has many, many, many different contexts. And I might just say that qi can marry the intangible with the tangible. So we can have body experiences, but also mental experiences or spiritual experiences, or energy, non-physical experiences could all fall under qi. And then the third layer is presence or spirit. And in essence, this layer is almost completely energetic or mental. And so these also end up being three facets of ways to experience. We can experience from a body-centric experience perspective. We can have an energetic, maybe somewhat emotional centric experience, and then we can have a consciousness, mental, very purely mental experience, or any mix of them. And I find those very useful, to kind of the way they can describe how we're working.
And these aren't kind of abstract concepts. We'll work with exactly how to use this alchemy to refine them. And I find it very interesting, you talk about essence, jing. It's when someone's really burning through their essence, you'll see their hair begin to go a bit whiter, you'll find, and then fingernails, those kind of white bits of lack of nutriment. And I've heard you also map it on, it's just an interesting resonance, but the first satipatthana, foundation of mindfulness of the body. And I think it exists a bit more, we can invoke it a bit more in that lower realm of the body to some extent, and you can correct any of these things you see as wrong. Qi, a bit more interesting resonance with the second foundation of mindfulness, Vedanupasana. And also, this sort of flow of the breath body, it maps more onto the heart area. And then shen, spirit or essence. And this is, I think, what you talked about. You can see it shining out of the eyes of infants and also awakened practitioners. You see it shining out of their eyes, and it can invoke experience in others. And it's interesting for me to reflect, in the Anapanasati Sutta, or even the similes for jhana, you begin with, this ball of dry bath powder, you knead in the water, and sort of this chi and nourishment, piti, rapture. And over time, you get to the fourth jhana, where it's talked about as a person covered head to toe in a white sheet, so that no part of their body is not touched by that white sheet, similar to a purity of mindfulness. And I've always thought as shen, or similar to it. Is there some resonance in what I'm talking about, or would you refine any of those?
I think there absolutely can be. Mm-hmm. I don't choose to give them hard definitions where I decide exactly where they begin or end, but I find if we orient to each one, they can be quite useful in helping us understand different ways we might have an experience or operate. And we might think of them as a spectrum from coarse to refined, or from coarse to subtle. And I think the jhanas are similar. They likely are a movement from coarse to subtle as we move from the piti primary and the first jhana to maybe more sukha and some piti, so some bliss with this rapture. And then from there, the rapture is no longer really a feature, and we have this equanimity and bliss. And then even the glow of the bliss, kind of the activity of it, leaves just this presence and equanimity.
Would that evaporate into something else entirely? Thusness, I think you talk about?
Yes, in my understanding and practice in both Buddhist and Taoist practices, this subtle, whatever the subtle end of the refined end of things is a near miss of suchness or emptiness or non-fabricated experiencing. And so when it gets so close to it, it's very relieving, and it's something the mind inclines towards. And after kind of remaining inclined and experiencing this type of experience for a while, it becomes evident that there's still some little bits of dukkha in this experience. There's some agenda or something being made or some thing that's being held that there may not even be words for it, but all we have to do is be willing to release those unnecessary elements. And when they release past a certain point, this near miss evaporates into sort of the actual form is uncovered, or something closer to it that I would refer to as suchness or emptiness or something along that spectrum.
So, returning to foundational language, there's two other paradigms I think we should touch. One is earth, heaven, person, and the other is fire and water. How would you map those onto the body or the practice?
Those three, heaven, earth, person, we might just think of them as the earth is, in that analogy, what's left if life were to leave the body. So we have the actual the physicality, but nothing animating it. And then the heaven, we might call that which animates. And then when they combine, as a human, we call that person. And this is this real-time interaction between these. Sometimes there's more animating and less physicality. Sometimes there's a great deal of physicality and very little animating. So I would refer to those three as kind of analogous to those things. And then fire and water relate to sort of the kidneys and the heart in East Asian medicine. And what we're kind of looking at there is that the intention and attention, we might think of them as coming from the heart center. And this is the fire. And then the kidney and sort of sexual lower area of the body, the glandular and eliminating area of the body as well. This is the water. And in old Taoist concepts or ways of phrasing things, if the fire stays above the water, nothing really happens. The water stays water and the fire stays fire. But if we can get them to commingle in such a way that they don't put each other out or get rid of each other, then they can turn into a steam that sort of suffuses and changes things. And so this is to bring the heart center and its qualities of attending and placing, I guess, attending to experience or just feeling down in the water area of the body, which is the lower portion of the body, and allowing that feeling, and then in that area, whatever is felt, to commingle repeatedly. And this causes a sort of commingling of fire and water.
So I think this actually moves us to kind of the practical practice, because what I found is, say someone wants to develop loving kindness or pleasure or piti or just meditative energy or something, you're right, if the fire's just remaining above the water, if attention's always placed in the heart, sometimes the fuel's just not there. It's just a sanya perception and it fades. But much of what the practice which you'll speak to is, first bringing attention, this, somewhat more fire-coated element to bear on the breath, calming, and then bringing it down, attention down to the lower dantian if you're male, or the heart dantian center if you're female, and allowing that to kind of basically, steam the water, and then that steam pervades the body and mind and begins to unkink pipes, heal things, and really evoke quite powerful changes and give you a fuel where, I think you've phrased it before as, at some point, if there's certain steam, you realize it's gasoline steam and you just light a match of loving kindness or a perception of light, and it just supernova of kind of change. And then you start again, re-steam everything, and it gives us a source of actually finding the fuel. And I thought this was such a meaningful and easily accessible, practicable element of working with breath and the bodily energy. So would you speak to how do we work with the three treasures? What's this process?
Yeah, they are like three forms of fuel, or three phases of fuel. And this isn't a philosophy or an analogy. These are actually experienceable phenomena. And so part of it is to, once we know of these three, the body level, the essence level is the grossest form. It's the most accessible generally if we're starting from scratch. The spirit form is the least tangible, and so it can be quite hard to work there at first because we aren't sensitive to it, and it's just so intangible. It can feel like playing with light instead of something solid. And then the chi level is kind of in between, and so these three are like fuel sources, and they're also modes of mind, maybe, or ways that we can experience in a body-centric way, in a chi-centric way, or in a spirit-centric way. And when we attune to each one, then we can find a resonance with that type of fuel. And so in practical terms, it's possible that we might practice a meditation method that works with a type of fuel that we are not really sensitive to yet, or there's not an abundance of that fuel. And so these three are linked in that the fuel can transmute between them. And so when we learn how to work with each one and then do practices that allow them to transform into each other, then we can start to replete any depleted areas within our being. And once they're repleted, then we find that often our practices come alive.
So tell us how to replete them. How do we boil? There's the relaxing into song or yin, coming to dantian, breathing, developing either the middle or lower, and then steaming. So tell us about this.
Okay. So the first level or layer would be we want to settle into yin deep enough that yang is born.
And yin is?
And yin is body.
And softening and?
Yes, inactivity.
Okay.
Yang is like the pure animating force almost.
A bit more fire.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So what we want to do in that layer of practice, and where many of us should begin most of our practices, is to marry the breath and the awareness very gently, as if they're leaning on each other. And then just experience them this way. We don't want to press them together. We don't want to pull them apart. We want to kind of let them just hold each other up and then just feel them. And so the language I use here is how comfortable and quiet can the breathing be in any given moment. And we just kind of feel that. We explore Especially, I'd like to emphasize the comfortable part at first. Letting the breath end whenever it's most comfortable, letting it start when it's most comfortable, letting the rate of breathing be as comfortable as it can, letting the opening of the throat be as comfortable as it can, letting the flow of air as it moves anywhere over the body, let it be as comfortable as it can. But this by itself can also sort of soothe us into a dreamlike, foggy state. So we also need to be interested enough to let them stay in balance. And that interest comes from how quiet is it and how comfortable is it. If we just gently are interested in how comfortable and quiet is it without a goal, and there's no problems we need to make, there's nothing we need to do, it's just an exploration, then it can keep softening, but the interest doesn't go away. And when these two get past a certain threshold where the softening and settling has gone on long enough and deep enough, and there is awareness of this experience, what it feels like, then yang will be born. And yang can take many forms, but in its purest form, it might be something like piti or sukha in Buddhist language, or yang qi in Taoist language. So there is some movement that comes directly from the settling. This can also take forms like physical sexual arousal in the body. It can come up as restlessness. It can come up as a lot of creativity. It's some inspiration or movement that comes directly from the fact that settling kind of happened. And so our first stage of practice is to successfully settle with interest until this occurs in some fashion, and then we work with what comes up.
I think of this often, it really is as simple as this, where, for me, I just notice I come to meditation often holding a lot of tension in the forehead, the eyes, and the face. And if I just come to the breath and soften the tension again and again and let it kind of just let the mind drop to the breath again and again. I think of it as, I used to play violin, and when you're tuning the violin, you initially just, or even, we'll use a cello because that'll work better for later parts of the simile, but, you really want to let the wrist be fluid and just allow the bow to go back and forth and the breath really relaxed. And it's just the same note, but it's relaxed, but it's also you are listening to it. And it maps onto the Anapanasati Sutta, mindfulness of breathing, in that initially you're just knowing the inhale and the exhale, and then knowing a long breath and then a short breath. And the short breath not being a stuttered breath. So knowing the in and the out breath, long and a short breath not being a constricted gasping, but just subtle, more and more subtle. And then it's also very interesting, this is the experience of settling into yin. A yin and yang have a seed of the other within each. So yin, softening, more feminine, water has that seed of the yang in it. And this is very experiential, as you do find that as you settle into that softness, you often refer to it as a pilot light, suddenly lights. And I feel this in my lower dantian, is settle until there's suddenly like, and then what?
Yeah, so this is the fuel. This is the ideal fuel to work with to replete our system. And the way that I mentioned that it can take forms such as restlessness or sexual arousal is really enough settling has happened that vital energy has been freed up or released in some way. And so that's what we're looking for, is this pilot light of vitality to kind of present itself. So once it presents itself, the next phase of practice is to bring it to a place where it can be refined. And so the way that it is brought, I'll have to give some other terms to talk about it, is where the attention is placed, the chi is drawn there. And when the attention and the chi are drawn somewhere enough, the body also responds. And so what we do, if we're male, we bring the attention to an area below the belly button. If we're female, we start with an area usually somewhere around the heart center or a little below, and it's done by feel. And then we've lit this pilot light by settling, comfortable, quiet breathing. Once we feel that, we begin continuous mindfulness or awareness of sensations at the appropriate spot. And by doing that, the attention draws the energy there, and the energy draws the body response, and all of it somehow melts down this fuel into like a neutral form. It no longer is the form that it showed up as, and it begins to coalesce and kind of almost like in that jhana simile, knead, work itself together and change form into more and more of a steam. And it's a lot like a pot of water slowly coming to a boil and then starting to release the vapor.
And you said you find each of those by feel. How do you find it by feel? I know we've talked about you can use your fingers. Interestingly, I noticed you talked about how the pointer finger sucks in qi and the middle finger shoots out qi. And I actually feel that, and that was fascinating. And I find that to find my dantian effectively, about 2 finger breadths below the navel, I would meditate often with my middle finger pressed against it and my other hand kind of pushing it in just to keep my awareness there easily. So how does one find the dantian so you can remain with your attention there for this second step?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do something similar. I kind of, since my middle finger is longer, I'll just cup my hand slightly so it's a tiny bit longer than the fingers around it, and then I'll place it on my chest or my belly and slide it up and down until it feels just like it comfortably sockets in that spot, or that touch is comforting. Another way we can do that is to cup our hand, or cup it and bring all the fingers and thumb together, and then we just place that warm hand on the body and slide it up and down until we find that for some reason feels comforting. It feels nice there. And if we just explore like that, we can zero in more and more on what the appropriate area is. It's a forgiving exploration. So if you just start, if you're working at the heart center, you start somewhere around where it feels like you might be, and then you just bring your other hand over and you move it up and down, and then let it rest there for a while. Or if you cup your hand, you just slide that finger up and down until you find a spot, and then you kind of rest your other hand there and just let that warmth that warm touch kind of soothe the body. And it somehow, I guess it's sort of intuitive. It just feels like, oh, that seems like it might be it. That's good enough. If we get close, the process still occurs. And as it occurs, the area of the dantian and the best way to interface with it, they will more overtly show themselves. It sort of becomes more tangible and obvious. And then next time the touch is even easier to find the right spot.
So to simplify, step 1 is bring attention to the breath to harvest the qi and to settle into yang or yin, which is known as song or softening is another term for it. Step 2 is to center attention as soon as a pilot light lights or yang is birthed naturally at the appropriate dantian. Bring attention there and just experience the breath, the sensations of the breath at that spot. And I really would meditate with my middle finger helping me identify it long term. And for me, I actually use the simile of the cello a little more, where it's not like I would let go of my sensation of the breath completely, but it's almost like I was working at the lower tuning pegs as I was still drawing the bow across. So you, like at a cello, reach down to those lower tuning pegs and you're kind of tuning them. And the sense of piti, which in Buddhism is this term for, it's translated as rapture, but that's problematic sometimes because it can just be a sense of nourishment, like, oh, there's something, it's kind of drinking it up. It's water almost. It's just, it's gentle, but it feels good. It's comforting, like you said, and it feels like something's kind of soaking in there. So first tell me if that maps on, and then I think some people will just have that question about the male and female difference. Why is that relevant, and how should people think about that?
Sure. Yeah, that maps on. It's a forgiving process. So We haven't yet said how long should you do each of those things, or even that they have to be done in that order. But generally, settle for a period of time until fuel appears is a good way to work. And then once the fuel appears, that is a good time to pivot to continuous mindfulness of the dantian sensations. And there are three things there that at least I find helpful. One is continuously aware. The second is of the dantian area. And then the third is the feelings of breathing in that area, in that awareness. The continuous awareness is forgiving. It means return to it, return to it, return to it. If we get distracted, just be interested, keep feeling it. So if we do that, then we start to draw that fuel, refine and transform it. And that's the whole kind of, that part of the phase is just continuously working with that. If we run out of fuel or we get distracted, we could start over. We could go back to settling. And then once the pilot light lights again, we go back to drawing it to the dantian. And drawing happens naturally by just feeling it. So we just feel it. The difference between the sexes is not a hard difference. It's not saying people have to do it one way or the other. It's actually rooted in just some skillful means, I guess. For someone that has been born with a uterus, there's often a connection between the heart and the uterus. And so by working at the heart, it develops something here that also propagates down into the belly naturally. If a person that was not born with a uterus does that, it doesn't always do that. It doesn't go down into the belly. And so they start in the belly to work there, and then it makes its way up. It's a good practice to just try what might be most accurate for each one of our bodies, and then feel if working at the heart center isn't ever developing anything else in the body, then we might try going to the lower dantian area. And if working at the lower dantian area isn't making its way up to the heart, then we might try feeling at the heart center.
Some practical means you also talk about for developing this is first continual awareness throughout the day, as you mentioned, but also bellows breathing. Could you speak to some of the skillful means you give for continuing these development of the dantians?
Sure, yeah. Bellows breathing is kind of a term I use for healthy breathing and how it can move the body. And so what that looks like at first is a lot of us have gotten to a point where when we breathe, the only thing that moves is our chest, but our belly doesn't move at all. So if we bring one hand down to the belly and one hand, we place it on the chest, and we can do this upright or laying down, but we just let some deep, comfortable breaths happen. Eventually that lower hand will move, the hand on the belly. And that's what we're looking for, is not just the chest to move, but the chest and the belly to have some movement in the breath. So,
a wave.
Yep, a wave happens. It may be sequential or it may be at the same time, but we're looking for movement that isn't limited just to the chest. Once that occurs and the lower belly can move, then we can bring both hands down there and just let that breath move the belly in an expansion and contraction. And we let that be as comfortable as it can be. And when that develops, this would already be considered a form of bellows breathing, but it can go further. By then, if we bring a hand back to the chest, the breath first moves the lower belly. And when the lower belly seems to fill, then the chest lifts. It's like room for the heart, and the lungs kind of lifts up. And when these happen, this is a very potent way to breathe comfortably that brings healthy kind of vitality and calm into the experience.
And doing this throughout the day as well, to some extent?
Yeah, we might not be able to do it at first throughout the day. Just take 5 to 15 minutes and practice. But once we can, a good ideal is to see any time that it's comfortable, can the breath move the belly? And if it can comfortably, can it make its way from the belly up to the heart on an inhale? And then on the exhale, can it just be soft and natural? And then when it comes in again, can it make its way all the way down to the belly and make its way up to the heart center? And so we can explore that waiting in line or driving or standing or laying down. Even if it's comfortable, if we're going to take a nap, we can begin by doing that first.
So now can we speak about phase 3 of the practice? So we've softened into phase 1, we've become as kind of aware of the breath as we can, quiet as it can, harvested the qi until yin gives rise to yang, the pilot light lights. One places awareness at the proper dantian and gathers qi there as attention continually moves. They're just experiencing it. Often that really does manifest as a sense of piti or nourishment. And like you said, it's a very forgiving practice, and just, there's not really a goal. You just be there with it and trust. And it really does gather something. And then what's so heartening is the people I think in your course have experienced is something then happens, which is the medicine steams, the water steams. What's this next phase?
Okay, yeah, this is the third phase, and it happens when that medicine has collected to some degree and has also kind of become more uniform feeling to some degree. So it may start off feeling like tingles and also like pressure and also maybe some heat. But after a while, it all feels very similar in that area. It's almost like it goes from being a semi-solid to like a fog or something. And then once that's more like that, we release any agenda. We just soften body and mind. We allow the body to be in this heaven, earth, person posture. So that means we let it be bottom heavy. And then we let the crown of the head stretch towards the sky gently. And we just kind of let everything in between relax. And then we remove any agenda, and we go from having the attention at the dantian, whether it's the lower or the middle, to just experiencing the whole body as a field almost. We don't fixate or foreground anything. We just kind of feel everywhere. And then the energy and the sensations that we were feeling will do things on their own. And the goal of this phase, or kind of the practice of this phase, is to let that happen so that the body's natural systems use this fuel to replete it in whatever way it needs. And it tends to kind of warm and open and soften whatever needs that without us directing it in any way.
So this is very interesting because, this sort of what they also call steaming the medicine or burning the medicine, where, you brought that fire element down below the water, it's boiled the cauldron, and then it suddenly shoots up throughout the body. And for me, it's not just a uniform slow steaming up, it actually kind of rises very quickly to the top of the head, almost like the cello player suddenly moves to the top pegs and tunes them, and it has to kind of be there for a second and really rise, and then it kind of moves to a more fluid, uniform circulation around the body. And this maps quite well onto, descriptions of Kundalini awakening, where there's this sudden rise of energy up the spine, up to the top, and quite problematic actually sometimes, where it's a huge amount of energy rushing up to the head and can kind of blow the top off. What would you, apart from simply allowing that steam to circulate, do you have any other skillful means for how to hold that steaming period?
Okay, let's see. I think the first thing that comes to mind is to feel the earth facet of heaven and earth. So we want to feel the descending. The whole body is settling in line with gravity. It's kind of settling continuously. And then we just have the crown of the head rising towards the sky. So a vast amount of the physical experience is this just almost like clothes hanging on a clothesline. And the more that we feel that, that will also draw the chi and the body's response downward. It will descend things. And the ideal kind of circulation model is like a fountain where it keeps using its water to pump it upwards, and then that same water falls downwards and is then circulated up again and again and again. So a mistake we can make is when we feel things come up, we start placing the attention there, we foreground that, and that starts to draw the chi up there and the body responds up there, and then there's not much circulation going on. There's just a collection going up. And this can present as headaches or pressures, all types of stuff, different sensations, some of them quite unpleasant, some of them just mildly problematic. But to work with that skillfully, we need to bring the attention down. And that way it draws things or opens things enough that they can descend naturally on their own and then come back up and then descend naturally on their own again and again.
I find also this, sort of maps onto the microcosmic orbit a little bit, where that energy can come up the spine and then down the front channel. And one skillful means that we've talked about is called the magpie bridge, which we found out actually had this beautiful mythological framing in Chinese mythology, where I think it's a cowherd and a weaver girl fall in love and then are separated by the Milky Way, but it's separated somehow, but then once every year or something, the Milky Way allows them to meet and they touch. And as the energy comes up, it can get stuck in the head, but one skillful means is pressing the tongue gently to the roof of the mouth, just resting it there. And that allows that energy to actually not get stuck here, but to come down and circulate. And it's such a minor motion, and yet it was night and day for me when you just touch, to the point where now it's a natural response all the time, is I just keep it up there very gently, not, but it makes a huge difference in completing that channel. And one sign of this being effective, beginning to salivate as well. So do you have anything to say about, the microcosmic orbit, that kind of channel or magpie bridge?
Sure. Yeah, it is a good practice. A lot of us have received that practice somewhere in a meditation history, if we've practiced for a while, to put the tongue on the roof of the mouth. But you're right, it should not be forceful. It should be super gentle. And when we do that, we have a yang movement of the energy or the fuel, which goes upwards from the ground up the back to the top of the head. And then we have a yin movement where it descends back down, almost like a waterfall. And there can be places along both paths where things get blocked, or they tend to be blocked. And for many of us, it can get caught in our face, in our forehead, and the throat and the heart center. And so when we gently touch that tip of the tongue behind the front teeth to the top of the mouth somewhere, then it makes kind of a route of less resistance for the energy to go down on its own, to descend and then come back up. And this going down the front of the body and then coming up the back of the body is often referred to as the microcosmic orbit. That's one of the Chinese terms for it.
And is this the governing channel, and this is the
conception
channel?
Yeah.
So after steaming for a while, and you're right, I think you've talked about it, kind of works on you in its own way. It unkinks pipes, it heals things that you wouldn't have known would be healed. It shows you blockages that weren't there. And after a time, I find that it kind of diffuses and dissipates, and then you start from one again. You allow the mind to kind of soften and harvest chi from the breath, wait for the pilot light to light, reboil the water, re-steam the whole body, rinse and repeat. Or like a still, I think you've talked about it, where you boil the water and it kind of distills down. Is that the right way of thinking about it, or how would you talk about using those three phases?
Yeah, we have to find our own personal rhythm for it, but yes, it's sort of a firing cycle where we first need fuel. I'd like to use this opportunity to say that the fuel can be pre-existing. If we are already feeling strong emotion or lots of motivation or restlessness or something like that. That's already a type of fuel that can be, if we go straight to experiencing the dantian, it can be melted down. But the highest quality fuel comes from settling into yin. And this fuel is usually not very entangled. And it has a really, I guess, a strong effect when it's melted down. So whichever way that fuel is arrived at, first there's the fuel, then there's the continuous experiencing at the dantian area, whichever one we're going to use. And then that fuel changes form and also kind of changes tangibility until it's like a steam. It's more uniform, and it may, like you said, move throughout the body, suffuse it or thrust upwards or do something. At this point, it's much harder to physically affect it by directing it with the mind or tightening something or doing something with the breath. So we basically stop foregrounding any spot in the body with our attention, and we just open up. We just kind of feel, and we watch the play of the energies. But what starts to happen over time is that the energies eventually start to move up and down. They cascade down and they move up, and there's some sort of orbit, and sometimes it creates a gentle rocking motion that many meditators have experienced before. Or we might start doing a circular motion at the waist. We might have serpentine motions that go up the spine. We should not fixate on any part of it, but just kind of be fascinated and let it run its course. And this phase is best described as just letting things run their course until at some point you'll be done or nothing much will happen. And when that happens, we can take a break if we're done, or we can go back to the first part of the cycle again, and we settle and allow yang to be born from yin. And then out of that, we take that fuel, refine it at the dantian until it steams and suffuses. And then once that's happened, we allow it to cycle again. And by doing this over and over, like you said, a lot of things heal, things open, and capacities for different types of practices show themselves or develop.
I would really echo a lot of what you said there with, after there comes a point where after, you've tuned below, tuned above, and kind of settled into this cycle, sometimes I'll really actually almost invite that rocking back and forth, because it tunes me into that energy in a certain way. And that is a really very real experience for me and many meditators, is that gentle rocking. But it's almost like then you begin to sometimes hear the music that you're playing, where it's the sound of silence, or perception of light becomes quite apparent, or, like you said, at that point, sometimes the steam, you can realize it's actually gasoline, and if you drop in a word of loving kindness, it's just, you have the fuel for it. Where so often if you come straight to trying to develop metta without having any fuel, there's not much there, but if you steamed, you have the fuel. And then after a while it dissipates, and then just like a violinist would gently try to find that note again, you come back to that first step, but it's even more gentle and refined than the first time. It's not a zero-sum game, it's getting quieter and deeper. So there's two roots I want to talk about before speaking about the next phase in this, which is the wiring together of the dantians and the steady ascension and connecting of the three into an antenna of the central channel. But one is, would you speak any more about daily life practice using the dantian awareness to draw in other moments of yang activation, more entangled ones like anger, and melting them down into new fuel rather than expressing them?
Yeah, that really becomes a skill that we will become more hopefully fascinated by and try to employ. And it's just continuously experiencing sensation at the appropriate dantian. If there's no fuel, then we're doing something that might be called cooking with an empty pot. And we should take some time to settle. Or we could go to the third stage and just kind of not direct anything and just let the vital energies of the body play. But most people, most days, we have stuff that comes up. We have emotion, or we have impulse, or restlessness, or sluggishness, or something. And any of these potentially can be employed in this second phase, where when we are aware of it, the response, instead of struggling with it or trying to do something specifically with that thing that we're feeling, we use that as a reminder to feel the dantian. And then these things get transmuted, they get melted down. And the whole purpose, or a useful purpose of this process, is that as fuel is melted down, it then travels through the dantian system. And the lower dantian tends to handle more coarse fuel and more coarse experiences. And the central dantian often handles, or better handles, energetic and emotional things. And then the upper dantian often handles transcendent and very mental or spiritual experiences. And so by melting the fuel down and letting it circulate, it finds its way to each one of those areas and develops them in its own time. And as they develop, they eventually become equally accessible and equally tangible feeling.
I'd say one other term, we've touched on the basis of this already, but I found it a very useful duality of terms, is warrior fire and scholar fire. So would you just speak briefly to those two languages and how they overlay into what we've spoken about, or beyond?
Sure. So these terms, in the way that I'm presenting it, there are two modes of working with things. And the mode where we are feeling sensations at the dantian is the warrior fire mode. And this requires direction of the attention. So we place the attention on the dantian area, and then things may wish to draw the attention off of it, and we just return. We become very diligent about feeling there. Just feel there and let the fuel transform. And this becomes a way, as it develops, that we can deal with very difficult thoughts, emotions, memories, reactions within the body, etc. They can be melted down and transformed. And we can feel that happening as we work with it. So it's sort of like a willful way of working with it. The scholar fire approach is the third of the phases, where we allow the natural systems of the body to work and rebalance things completely on their own without any direction. And so it's more of a type of very broad and deep witnessing.
So what's quite beautiful here, I mean, I love those terms, because warrior just is more directed, more kind of, and then scholar, a much softer, allowing approach in many ways. So after these three phases you've begun to work with them, something else happens. This isn't the end of the story, which is that the three centers, these dantians, begin to wire together. So would you speak to what one might experience as they begin to connect?
Yeah, let's see. If we're working at the lower dantian, eventually we will feel things start to happen at the central dantian. And this would be sort of the heart or heart center area. And for many of us, if we have emotional guarding, or we have a history of needing to shut off our feelings or something along those lines, then there will be a sort of armor here in the center of the body. And by continuing to work at the lower part of the body, the plumbing is there already for it to spread up and develop the middle and upper parts of the body. So if we have an issue at the heart center, and we normally work at the lower dantian, we don't abandon the lower dantian and focus at the heart center. We just, without any agenda, we just very diligently process the fuel in the lower body, and then it will work its way up and just kind of open. It sort of steams things open almost. It's like as if the obstructions were made of ice, and just being in this warm steam over and over, they melt down. And then as this develops, it starts to make its way up to the head, and it develops things in the head and at the crown of the head also. And these things are best, especially in the head, not done by leading sensations there, because energy can get stuck in the head, heat can get stuck in the head and cause feelings of pressure and headaches. But when it makes its way up there naturally, it's quite safe. And so by feeling at the lower dantian, it opens up the middle and then the upper. If we're working at the middle dantian as our primary practice, then that, as it becomes more developed, it makes its way down, it develops the lower, and it comes up and develops the upper. And eventually we start to have a tangible experience of all three of these areas. Each of them kind of handle different energies a little better than the others. And they become almost like a wired together network of refinement processors or something. They can take things in and transform them, and they can move between them the energies that need to be dealt with. And so that which connects all of them we might call the central channel, which opens at the crown of the head and travels all the way through the body to the base of the torso.
Thank you, Jason. And yeah, this, I think, is an experience many will have where you, beginning, it really does feel nourishing and good to be at that lower dantian, but as you've gone through these 3 phases of harvesting the chi, boiling the water, steaming the medicine, again and again, awareness becomes buoyant and light, and you don't want to go down as much anymore. And suddenly the middle of the body becomes a lot more relevant, maybe touching on the head. And what I found very interesting is, though we're talking about 3 main centers, the lower dantian, the middle dantian, and the pineal gland at the middle of the brain, the upper dantian, when you look at certain diagrams, which we'll probably overlay, where those, that's the seed of the dantian, but it actually begins to expand into a sort of a bubble filling out each chamber. And those chambers interlock. So you have a point around, maybe the diaphragm or so, where the middle dantian and the lower dantian are kind of meeting. And similarly with where the middle dantian and the upper dantian meet, you can point exactly where that is. But if you map on those intersecting points, it almost is a perfect alignment with the yogic chakras. And so what I also found is when you do just get an intuitive feel for what feels right, and one way I found of speaking about it is sticking with kind of the string metaphors of playing different chords. So for a long time I found that instead of moving, I didn't want to go to the lower dantian anymore. And similarly, all my attention to the heart didn't feel right, but somehow touching this place, that kind of intersecting point in the diaphragm, and then the sort of up in the upper spot of the upper half of that middle chamber, that was how I kind of began to invoke that middle dantian and connecting it again and again. And then after a time of that, you just keep invoking that, but the lowest the mind would want to go would be about here. And then after time, it began to open the upper dantian as well. And the mind would still go down every now and again, but much more briefly. Would you speak any more about the wiring together, or is that, and another really key element which I think we want to speak of is this small micro shift in posture, which is opening the heart by lifting the chest forward slightly. And it almost creates a tension cord connecting the lower and middle dantian and opens the pipe. And as with the magpie bridge, I found this micro movement unbelievably powerful for allowing those 2 dantians to wire together. So would you speak about any of that?
Yes, that connection I've also found to be really potent. So to do that, we basically arrive at the ability to breathe in such a way that the lower belly expands on the in-breath. And then leaving that, able to do that, we sort of lift the heart center or lift the sternum so that it almost feels like it draws a cord or like a string between the middle and the lower body. And we leave a very light engagement there, just like the tongue resting on the roof of the mouth is lightly touching. there's this light stretch. And this opens up like a communication channel for the energies to move easily between these areas. Also, it's just very common in our modern day that we don't leave enough room in the chest. We often kind of collapse the chest, bring the shoulders forward. And so when we lift it a little bit, it makes room for the heart and for the lungs and for the energies to kind of move. So I find that a really powerful, tiny postural thing. I usually tie that with the angle of the head. So I will lift the chest and drop the chin the same amount. And this also opens the back of the neck where it meets the skull, which is another place energies can get stuck. So if we kind of gently do that, not rigidly, but just create a gentle engaged stretch, this is sort of a helpful posture for working with these three. Then the energies themselves, at first, we should work at the dantian that is appropriate for us and let it sort of develop. I sometimes use the words of we want it to go through a sort of energetic puberty. So it needs to have a chance to really change how it's going to change.
Stop.
Thank you. So we need to give it a chance to change how it's going to change. But once it does that, each of the dantians go through a maturation process. And once they don't have to complete this, but once they have started to mature and become accessible, then that analogy you gave of almost playing chords with them is very accurate for me. We allow, by feel, the attention to foreground in whatever combination of the dantians the mind kind of inclines towards. And I use language of foregrounding and backgrounding to describe that. So the most predominant spot will be the foreground experience. Maybe that's the middle or the lower dantian. But it's possible that while that's the foreground, there are also light background experiences of the other dantians and maybe other parts of the body, and they're all being felt at the same time. And maybe the head will come in and be predominant for a bit, and then it may be almost completely absent from the equation as we feel the middle and the lower work together. So by working at the appropriate dantian, all three develop, this network of communication develops, and then they can begin to kind of be managed by a natural intelligence that handles things in a really beautiful way.
So does what you just talked about map onto the warrior fire step of focusing on the appropriate dantian, or the scholar fire of just where the steam naturally moves to, or sort of beyond any of those, and you just, what does it map onto any of those three phases, would you say?
I think it can be both of the ones you described. So if we talk about the warrior fire phase when we're directing experience to a spot, it's possible that we'll be, let's say, feeling the lower dantian, and then the middle dantian will keep feeling that even though we're directing attention at the lower one. And if that happens, we can explore feeling both of them, letting, kind of by feel, letting the attention distribute between them and see what that does. If things grind to a halt, then we haven't probably matured that other dantian or area to a place where it can do that. And we should go back to our root dantian that we practice with. But if it does work, then that means right now that's possible. If we have reached a place where the fuel or the medicine has circulated and it's now kind of distributed through the body and moving, then if we just let it do its thing, the play of it can light up these areas, and we can feel it light up the head, light up the chest, light up the belly, light up different combinations of them. And it's almost like a fireworks show, or like Aurora Borealis or something.
I think one thing we might speak about now is there's a few things I want to touch on. One is the problematic points, or problematic or interesting experiences people might have with sensing a huge amount of pressure at the forehead or things like this. But before that, another phase can begin to happen, and I find this can happen earlier in certain cases, where once those three dantians have connected and the central channels become somewhat vibrant and visible or tangible, you've talked about how suddenly this language of refining, these three treasures into one another may not be quite the right language anymore, because suddenly what's actually happening is you have an antenna which is suddenly receiving energy in a whole different way, and that's what's relevant at that point in practice.
Yes.
So can you speak about that next horizon if people do come to it?
Sure. So previously, to go back and make this more explicit, by placing the awareness on the sensations of breathing in the first phase, that has an effect of sort of harvesting chi from the breath. And whether that's actually what's happening or if it more just feels that way is less important than that happens. So up until now, the fuel has been coming from, at least in part, this experiencing the breathing as it's comfortable and quiet, or experiencing the breathing at the dantians. And so that creates a model where we're kind of like amassing fuel or gathering fuel and then working with it, and then it sort of refines until it's absent, and then we do it again. But once this maturation process of the energetic system, which eventually includes anywhere that the chakras might occur, as well as many other areas in the body, all the way out to the limbs, the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet, the waist, the center lines of the body on the front and back, etc. Once these all sort of wake up and are tangible, a sort of antenna has formed through that maturation process. And this antenna does not require mindfulness of breathing to fuel its experience. It can use that, but it opens to the larger energy present in the universe. And so this is where the heaven and earth posture becomes increasingly important, because if this antenna has formed to some degree, then when we take the heaven and earth posture and we settle downward, we then let the spine lengthen as the crown of the head rises, and we feel the sort of entirety of the experience of person as these two polarities play. Energies will start to show themselves, and behaviors within this energetic system will begin to occur that are conducted or received much more than they are collected. And they don't stay inside the body, and they don't come from inside the body. They're actually just kind of received. And so by developing the three dantians in this sort of storing and repleting system that we've talked about, and that leading to the central channel and the dantians beginning to operate and be felt, at some point there's a crossover where we may begin to just perceive, especially when doing the heaven and earth posture, that there's almost just like an energy that becomes something that can be tapped into, and then it flows through the central channel. It can circulate through the body. It can manifest as light, or like you said, the nada, inner sound. And these are sort of maybe indicators that energy is successfully moving somewhat freely. And so now the model has changed. We're no longer operating with the finite energy only of the body, but that body energy, which can be refined from essence to chi to spirit, also can combine with the sort of grand universal energy that is not tied to the body. And so now all of that can work together, and new combinations can kind of play out.
How would one know if one had touched that phase of practice?
Often, for me, there's a very tangible sense that if the posture becomes correct, as soon as that alignment of heaven and earth happens, there's almost like a magnetic pull of the posture to where the alignment is. It's like aligning a satellite dish to a signal.
Do you start to sway in that moment as well?
Yes, you can rock forward and back, left and right. And just by feel like what feels right, what feels like a good upright posture, and then let it sort itself out. Like I'll do it right now. I'm rocking a little bit. I'll let a little spiral come in there, and then just feel what feels like correct upright right now. And then as the movement gets tinier and tinier, there is an energetic sensation that starts to course through the system.
So Jason, would you keep talking about, so you spoke about some of these blockages that can form, and also about how when one steams with scholar fire, it can melt it like ice blocks would melt under repeated steaming. And one thing I'm also curious about is, as coming back to the paradigm away from the paradigm of steam, what also is happening as we're repeating these 3 cycles again and again, kind of firing the furnace, firing the medicine again and again, is there can be a gathering of qi, or there can be a gathering at these different dantians that then can lead to other experiences. Would you like to speak to any of those elements?
This is a natural part of this process. I usually just say, if we practice skillfully, something will happen, and the person will generally know what that means. But to be a little bit more clear about it, there is some refining of medicine, some refining of fuel, some of the substance of what things transform into starts to distribute, and we feel a maturation at these different places in the body and development of them. And maybe within the energy body, it may not be physical only that we're feeling this. And this third phase, where we keep letting natural systems work with the fuel, letting things rebalance, that gets more and more overt and more obvious that intelligent things are happening. It's like the natural systems are showing their activities as they rebalance things. And there is, like you spoke earlier, of a pearl, or something develops, something that sometimes it's called like a ball of medicine. It can show up in one or more areas, but as this, it's almost like it's like, words escaping me.
Embryo, egg.
It's like something distilling down. It's something distilling or coalescing.
Concentrating?
Yeah, concentrating. Like when we say like a juice concentrate, like it's like very much the taste of one thing. And as that builds, eventually it sort of just begins to operate completely outside of our willful direction. And so the energies will show themselves on their own, and they will do things on their own. The dantians will operate on their own. And sometimes this process becomes almost reversed of how we started, where we had to do all of these things and look at which was the right phase. But now these phases might show themselves to us. And a lot of us, after practicing well, it feels as if the qi becomes sentient, as if it moves of its own accord in intelligent ways, and it refines itself and changes forms and does things in a way that we can take as a teacher. And during these times, it's important to just honor and respect that this door has opened, it's possible right now. And just let it run its course. And the quality and behavior of attention, the quality and behavior of the essence and the chi and the spirit and how they interplay, a lot of these things when they happen are a once-in-a-lifetime combination, and they're not something we need to do something with. It's better for them to just be witnessed and allowed to run their course. And with that comes sometimes some very freeing change.
One thing I might mention now is, I know one practitioner, there are places where this practice people can come to interesting dead ends or problematic points. I know one practitioner, when the steaming phase was occurring, she was holding it in one spot in her heart, and it actually was building up to the point where she was almost having heart palpitations, and just wasn't giving herself permission to just allow it to truly expand even beyond the body or the feeling of that, and trusting it. And if you keep that much energy in one spot when it doesn't want to be, it's not great. So are there any other, if people do come to impact, how should people hold this practice, both in terms of what timeline they're looking at, and where should they go if they're coming into difficult places, or how should they hold those moments?
The timeline often given in Chinese systems is 100 days of diligent practice. So if we were to practice in, let's say, a Buddhist retreat environment, and we maintain a somewhat diligent schedule, we at least prevent a lot of the leakages that happen normally in our lives of energy and spirit, especially if celibacy and moderation of diet and regular touching of energetic practices, if those things come together, we're limiting our social communication and speaking, and limiting too much thinking and planning. These energies, those normally get used up by some of that stuff. And so the energy gets stronger. And it can be somewhere between a few days to a few months that people will generally feel some palpable changes happen if they kind of generally follow the guidance that the Buddha left for people practicing Dhamma, and what the Taoists offer, which is very similar. Like I said, it's moderating diet, communication, ethical behavior, being ethical, and not sleeping too much, not eating too much, and not being reckless with sex or being completely celibate during that time. So if we aren't practicing that way, these things can still happen if we practice an hour or two a day, but it might be more in the 3 to 6 month range or a year, but they do tend to happen. Each of us has different knots that sort of unfold or untie, and if we just follow these stages faithfully, they'll begin to be tangible. We can feel things are happening. And so as long as we do it by feel, it can run its course and kind of open us up in whatever way that needs to happen.
I would say, these are good timelines. And interestingly, about 100 days is about 3 months, which is a Buddhist season, or close to a Buddhist season. It's a Buddhist rains retreat. And yet for the scope of these practices, I also know it's a lifetime of work in terms of their full scope, and something one doesn't have to rush. And if people come to impasses, there aren't a great deal of resources out there, or are there, where people can go for any sort of consultation or otherwise?
Yeah, there are not a lot of great resources. At least there haven't been. That's part of why I try to help people with this stuff, is just because I'm trying to be something that was hard for me to find. In general, East Asian medicine is rooted in really healthy practices around this stuff, things that can correct imbalances. So a skilled acupuncturist or something related can potentially help. I meet with people and I'm happy to email or speak with people in person or through Zoom to help them if they have difficulties with that. And there are people in the Pacific Northwest that I've met that also work with things like this. Energy problems can happen in some other forms of Buddhism, and so there are some places where people have developed skillful ways of handling those things. In general, a good rule of thumb is bring the attention and the chi down. It will go up. Like emotions bring it up. When we get angry or we get scared or stirred up, we say that stirred up. Like it wants to come up. So we don't have to help it do that so much. But it really settling down. For most of us, settling is not an intuitive practice at first. It's difficult. So practicing feeling the sensations lower in the body, feeling the body settle, that can be really powerful to help offset anything that might build up.
So we'll talk in a second about both how this maps on to Buddhist framing pretty much perfectly, in my opinion, Anapanasati, the jhanas, and eventually to awakening. So sneak preview. Before that, one thing we haven't done is, I found it very helpful, some of just the concrete, and we've got your framing right for your body now, practices before and after meditation. So in terms of activating the breathing with the gasping breathing, and then also the ending, coming to the relevant dantian to draw the energy there, and then the ending of the meditation massage. Would you sort of be able to demonstrate any of those bookends?
Sure. So the breathing, if I'm recalling what you're speaking about correctly, we can start by...
At the beginning of the meditation?
Yeah, this is a practice you would use as a sort of preliminary. So you might start a practice with this. You blow out all of your air, and then you close your throat, and then you act as if you're trying to gasp for air, but you don't open your throat. And this will massage the ribs and the body. And then once, you don't want to push this uncomfortable, but just hold your breath for a comfortable amount of time and then let the air come back in. And I'll demonstrate that. So I'd blow all of my air out. And now I'm going to just let my breathing regulate again. So I'll wait until it's very comfortable. But if we do that 1 to 3 times, 3 cycles of that before we practice, this can be really powerful to help warm up for breath meditation practices. It opens up all these muscles between the ribs and the tissues and the diaphragm. And as long as we don't do this to discomfort or to cause anxiety, it's pretty safe to do. So that's the kind of gasping breathing. Okay, then at the end of our practice, after working with the fuel, working with the dantians, circulation, any combination of those, whether there have been multiple cycles or we mainly spent energy at one spot or the time at one spot, we can bring the energy back to the dantians. The dantians, middle and lower, are both good reservoirs for energy. So they're a safe place for it to come back to without it kind of flooding our system. And so for the lower dantian, I would bring my right or my left hand and put it on my lower belly. And then put the other hand over it and feel, is it most comfortable this way, or should I switch which hand's on the bottom and which is over it? And then I just feel the sensations there. I close my eyes, and this is in a soothing way. So I'm not trying to do anything really hard or make anything happen. I'm just kind of appreciating the comforting touch there. And I'll do this for about 36 breaths if I have the time. If you don't have the time, try at least 3 breaths. If it's the heart center, then I would bring my hand here, and same thing, I would feel, which way does it feel like it plugs in the best? And then just feel the sensations of comforting touch at this area 3 to 36 times. And this taps into the same principle I talked about of where the attention goes, the chi tends to follow it, and then the body responds. And so we're bringing a really healthy leading of the energies that may be all over the place back to a safe place for them to kind of collect. And that's a place that both of these areas are places the body doesn't easily get flooded by large amounts of energy, so it can hold a lot. Then I'll finish with a post-meditation massage, and there are some traditions I've run into in Taiwan and Vietnam especially that do these after every practice. But at home or on my own when I do energy work, I tend to finish with something like this. So I'll rub my hands together, and then I'll start with placing them over my eyes and then just rubbing my eyes and my face, and then the sides and back of my head. And you can modify this however you need to for your hair, through your scalp to the back of the neck. And I'm going to go from the top of the body down. I'm going to finish at the bottom. Down my...
Sorry, Jason. We don't even have to cut this out. There you go, Jason.
There we go. Down my throat. And then from there, I'm going to start on the inside of one arm and just rub down it until I get to the palm of the hand. And then go on the outside, back up until I reach the shoulder. I'll do the same on the other side. And then I'll rub my chest and heart center, my diaphragm, my belly. I'm doing all of this in like a clockwise action or from right to left as it comes up. Then I'll go along the sides of my ribs, along both sides of my back. And then the hips and thighs, the knees, lower legs, and then the ankles, feet, and finish if you can on the soles of the feet, if you can reach them. And this is just, again, drawing the attention, the energy, and the body response down. The soles of the feet are another place. It's quite safe to bring energy if there's a lot of it. And so just like we've felt at the lower or middle dantian and let the energy sort of collect there, you can also feel or breathe to the soles of the feet.
That was great. And that ending massage feels so good every time I do it. I would also say at the beginning, I really appreciate cold water. I've talked to people about this, but for me it really clarifies the chi. And we've also talked about standing tree pose and shaking as well. We maybe can throw up a diaphragm of standing tree pose for people. Is there anything you'd like to say about either of those practices at all?
Yeah, both those are very common in Chinese rooted practices, like Chinese spiritual practices and energetic practices, and they're really good tools to have in our toolbox. So standing is in essence heaven and earth, but just in a standing pose. So we let the crown of the head go up, we let the rest of the body settle down into the feet, we bend the knees slightly, and then we do a standing meditation of just feeling the sensations of the body as it's in that shape. And that is usually done for anywhere from 10 minutes to up to 2 hours at a time.
And I love the hugging tree pose too, actually, is what I'm maybe speaking about, where you're also sort of imagining holding a balloon and the power of the circulation of chi around as well in that sense.
Yes, there are a couple of different hand shapes you can do. So you can put the hands as if they're cupped on someone's shoulder, and then you can hold them at any of those three centers. So you can hold them as if the palms of the hands were aimed at the center of the head, at the heart, or at the belly. And then when you breathe, you can imagine or feel that the in-breath makes, like if a balloon or a ball was in here, that it slightly swells and then it slightly deflates. And this gives enough movement to help sustain that shape without too much pain. Those shapes where we hold the hands in a position help. They're a thing found in Chinese Qigong and Chinese martial arts that help accumulate or turn essence into other energies. So also bending the legs and staying standing for a long period of time can do that. You can also stand with the hands palm down and then palm up and just feel which feels better. Yang Qi, heaven, Yin Qi, earth. And so we just feel the sensations in the palm of the hands and stand that way. So any of those, or just hands at the sides, are good for standing practice. Shaking practices are sort of like jostling gently all the joints of the body. And then once they're safely jostling, which is healthy for them generally, you let the tissues of the body also sort of shake.
Can you do it while sitting at all, Jason?
Yeah. And we want to let even the teeth click gently, so we don't keep the jaw quite touching. Leave it a little open.
And would you just do this before sitting, after?
This can be either, especially after though, because it tends to help with blockages, to shake things loose. And then after a minute to 5 minutes, I would just slowly move less and less and less until I've found that it doesn't look like I'm moving at all. And you'll feel sort of the circulation that happens from that.
Thank you. And I'd say if people maybe have tried Qigong before and found it, doesn't feel like there's a there for them, that after cultivating the breath for a time, you really might find that you try one of these standing poses and it's unbelievably apparent that suddenly this breath body is something that you can touch and feel and invoke. So
yeah, a lot of times the issue with Qigong can be that there's not enough Qi to feel much or work with a lot. So practices like that can stir it up or transform some of it so that there's more tangibility to the practice.
And before going into the Anapanasati jhana and awakening, we spoke briefly about how there's not enough Qi built up, and we also spoke about the importance of keeping leakages from happening. So what is the importance of sila in terms of not having the bottom drop out of that cauldron and just constantly leaking the fuel? Where does that, how should people be restraining themselves in daily life to make these practices bear fruit? And
in general, it's very simple. We spend a lot of energy covering for ourselves when our behavior is questionable. We review it, and we also guard against others maybe calling us on it or it being revealed. Or we think about it to make it okay. And sila, to me, is actually a just wonderful return to simplicity. It's a way to live more simply where we don't have to think as much about it. And I've found that repeatedly in my own life. I could do energetic practices or meditate a certain way or something, but if my sila wasn't as great as I hoped, then it would bleed off. I'd still be ruminating and obsessing, and those things would happen a lot. So the more that we think of these precepts as stopping just relentless leaks of our vitality, we can see how they're also a technology that is a technology for spiritual development, not just rules. And the Taoists and the Buddhists both seem to see it this way. If they didn't, I find it really curious that they arrived at almost identical formulas for how to spiritually develop that include this as like a baseline. So on top of that, we can include other things that tend to burn off a lot of energy, and adding to thoughts or planning or social maneuvering, things like that. Those also can burn a lot of this. And it is burning the same fuel we're working with, because we're in essence in this alchemy, we're working with the body level stuff the body level energies and the body level experiences. And eventually they start to transmute into something that's more like emotional and energetic. And then it eventually refines into a capability of presence, sustained presence and clarity. And if we're burning all of that off as it's being clarified, then a lot of our work is kind of going up in smoke.
Interesting, the term for the asavas, which are the sort of core defilements in Buddhism, kamasava, the defilement of sensuality, of becoming, bhava-asava, avijja-asava, of ignorance. In Chinese, the word is lo, which means leak. So it's this leaking out. How critical, just a brief thing I think some might be curious about, is celibacy or restraint in sexual activity, and also intoxicants, those two elements.
If we're doing these practices that we've been speaking about, there's something to explore. It's not because of a moral obligation necessarily, but that's helpful, as I just described. But it also physically is, we're looking to arrive at a repletion of different layers of our being. And so one of those is the body will use energy for the potential of procreation pretty relentlessly. And so if we think about things or focus on things that keep us ready for that, the body will use a lot of the energy to just kind of maintain that state. And so when we don't focus on that, it's possible for those energies to be freed up, especially if we start bringing them to the dantian and let them sort of change form. It's kind of amazing what can happen by doing that. So, what else did you ask?
Intoxicants and celibacy.
Intoxicants can cause us to lose this simplicity. We aren't sure exactly where we were and what we were doing. And also we can easily break somewhat simple moral and ethical ways of living, just not on purpose, but just out of absent-mindedness or lack of clarity in those times. Also, intoxicants sometimes can burn up huge amounts of energy, whether it's because it can be rough on our body or because some fixation forms during that time or something. And then, again, we're just working at creating a really healthy, vital energy surplus that can then be used by the natural systems that can employ it to kind of raise our function.
So I had wanted to make sure we first touched on the practical entrance into this framework, but now I want to really clarify that to me this really maps so beautifully onto Buddhist language. This isn't sort of out of left field. And specifically the Anapanasati Sutta, the 16 steps of breath meditation, which the Buddha called the abode of the Tathagata. His abode was mindfulness of breathing. And actually, maybe I'll pass it to you for this, because I have found this practice maps so well onto that. Would you speak about how this practice maps onto the four tetrads, and roughly, we only have so much time, but and then onto jhana?
Okay. Yeah, we'll see if I can make sense of that. The first four parts of Anapanasati, the first four stages, are in essence experiencing the breathing and then allowing an expansive feeling of the experience and a calming. And so this maps very well with the first phase of practice. It's very similar. And in that first phase of practice, where we're doing comfortable and quiet breathing, there's interest there, there's knowledge of how the breathing is going. And then yang is born from yin. So some sort of movement or energy is born from this process. And in Anapanasati, we find that after these four first phases, the next thing is experiencing PT, experiencing some form of energy. And so this really like opened some doors for me in what was happening in my Taoist practice and what happened in some of my Buddhist practice. And then this energy, at first is the energy of PT, which can be more active and coarser. And then it moves into sukha. And then it moves into just experiencing, if I just paraphrase it, kind of the substance that PT and sukha are maybe made of, and then letting that calm. And so these are very much in line with this chi layer of the treasures refining. And this can be done by experiencing that PT or yang energy coming up, and then continuous experience of the dantian. And this is exactly what we find happens. It changes forms, it becomes less coarse, more refined, and it eventually calms and kind of unifies. And then from there, the third tetrad in Anapanasati is about mind states and uplifting mind, etc. This corresponds quite well with spirit, the third of the treasures. And as we get closer to clear spirit, which in Anapanasati might be called like released citta, this can be done by allowing this process to run its course and sort of untangle and sort things out as we let things circulate. And so this is the third phase of the practice. So they seem quite different in what they look like, but their function actually ends up being quite similar. The fourth tetrad in Anapanasati, I think, fits well in both. This is the exploration of liberating perspectives and how they then affect the being that has been released in body, feeling tone, and citta in Buddhist language, or if we went to Taoist language, we could say essence, chi, and spirit. As these have been released, now we attend to a liberating perspective, and then it can propagate and sort of bring liberating change to the system, because there's a lot less resistance and there's a lot more clarity, and it carries a lot of impact. In both, there's a place within each way of approaching this where we can have the fabricated kind of system of what we're doing become so natural that it almost evaporates and leaves behind just healthy, natural being. And this, regardless of what language we use for it, I think this touches into suchness or emptiness, which in the Taoist systems also is. This is the fourth phase. So we go from the essence phase, refining it, into the energy and spirit, energy or chi phase, letting it refine into spirit, clarity, and presence. And then when that finally like clarifies, it just ends up in suchness as it isness.
And would that correspond at all to that antenna moment as well, or is it those aren't quite exact equivalents? It's just both maturations that happen somewhat parallel.
I think the antenna moment, sort of like jhana, you can put jhana in Anapanasati. There are absolutely places where it seems to fit very well, and the antenna happening can totally fit in these three phases. But it's not in a defined space. It does seem to just happen at a certain level of refinement, and then it's very conducive to the chi spirit transformation into emptiness or suchness, kind of the last or the later phases of this transformation kind of happen with that conduction.
So before talking about suchness, how this practice actually can lead to awakening, let's overlay the language of jhana here. So does the awakening alchemy system we just talked about, where does jhana fit in, or where could it fit in?
One of the most obvious places would probably be with sufficient settling and comfortable, quiet breathing, which would also be in the Anapanasati system, really just developing those first four. When that happens past a certain point, piti, or what in Taoist language might be referred to as yang qi, shows itself. And if that's allowed to just show itself and nothing is done about it, it begins to just kind of happen all around and through and to suffuse the experience. And this could be taken as a form of first jhana. Once piti is there, or a coarser form of yang qi is there, if it is allowed to happen, and the natural systems that kind of handle it, experience it and work with it, it gets wearying in its first coarsest manifestation. And so it naturally sort of refines. And this is the movement from first to second jhana, potentially. After it refines further, it gets into sort of an afterglow that has a lot of clarity with it. And it's much less activity-based. It feels more like light than it does like raindrops or something. And so as that happens, we would be talking about something like third jhana if we're using the sutta kind of language for them. And then eventually even that afterglow starts to just open into luminous clarity and equanimity. And this is when the qi really starts to freely change form, circulate freely, and there's not much sensation of needing to do anything. It just starts to just kind of operate. And this will be fourth jhana, the entry to it. And then where these go from there, fourth jhana, or if you want to look at it as this very clear, clean circulation of the energies, and that which circulates them, those energetic centers and our pathways and meridians, eventually that sort of becomes arbitrary to even think of it in that fashion. It just is. It's just happening, and it's a natural unfolding. And this is sort of how jhana can lead into something that's not fabricated. It's very close. It's so low maintenance, it's so simple, and it's so nourishing that the mind and body can feel like they get enough. They start to feel okay or satiated. And when they are satiated, that craving and clinging energy just doesn't make sense. It kind of feels like an extra thing, and it can kind of just release on its own. And then what's left is something that was uncovered. It's not something that's made, but it's just been there, but hasn't been available.
Thank you. I know that, the Buddha spoke about the jhanas as the footprints of the Tathagata, like a footprints of an elephant, because they're so powerfully close, as you said, to awakening. And there's also a wonderful sutta called the Pasadika Sutta, where the Buddha says, mendicants, if sectarians say, you are addicted to jhana, you should say, yes, we are addicted to jhana, because there are 4 effects that result from practicing jhana: stream entry, once return, non-return, arhatship. And just to reorient people, because I think that mapping onto Anapanasati could have lost some people, but it's quite an amazing overlay. And the first 4 steps, what we call the first tetrad, knowing the breath, short, long, becoming sensitive to the whole body, and then calming the body. And that really mapping so well onto that first phase of song, softening, gently quieting the breathing. And then the second tetrad, the second 4 of experiencing piti, rapture, but also piti comes from the word pis, which means root, which means kind of to nourish, to drink. And that sense of just a sense of like well-being kind of soaking in slowly at the relevant dantian in that second phase where the pilot light's been lit, and you just sense this kind of welling up. And the similes the Buddha gives in jhanas of a lake, a cool lake with water just cool water coming in from a spring down below until the whole lake is pervaded by that cool water. Even so, a practitioner pervades this body with the pleasure and rapture born of seclusion or of concentration for the second jhana. And then, once the mind is really pervaded out, there's this sense of satiation, of sukha, calming of chitta sankhara, and of mental activity. And then this third tetrad of sensitizing to the mind, brightening the mind, calming the mind, and just that overlaying so well onto shen, spirit, and all this. Not a perfect overlay with the third, but that, like you said, the steady refining of the treasures. And then, interestingly, as you motion to the fourth, where contemplating impermanence, contemplating, cessation, dispassion, relinquishment in slightly different order, but just releasing the conditioned elements again and again until suchness, tathata. And I think you've talked about it in some ways as it seems like drawing legs on, like after a time, any of these practices or volition feel a bit like drawing legs on a snake is a Taoist way of framing it, which I loved. Would you have any more responses to all that? More refinements?
I think the jhana similes may potentially subtly point at some of these body experiences. I don't want to say they do, but I just hold that it's possible. So this first jhana simile of like a ball of soap flakes and then the water's kneaded in and kind of the whole thing is worked until it's suffused with this soap and water mix. This is like feeling the sensations of fuel all through the body. And not just looking in one spot, but sort of allowing whatever comes up from that settling to show itself anywhere. And to allow the attention, the awareness, to hold the whole body like the whole ball of soap. Like we have to notice the whole thing, not just a spot. And then the second jhana similar, we have this spring. This is at the bottom. And then it's gently bringing something pure up and kind of, there are just things that somatically feel similar with energy practices, with this kind of refreshment and purifying that seems to happen. And then the third one, if I'm recalling correctly, it talks about like a lotus in clear water that from its root to its tip.
The root to the tip, I was thinking the same thing.
Is just sitting there in this clear water. And this is like the central channel and the heaven and earth alignment. Like the whole thing is allowed to just kind of be felt. And this is where that antenna, like you talked about, can kind of happen. And that's associated with this kind of sukha, bliss and equanimity mixing in this much more refined energy. And then the person with the white sheet, and just, it's as if they were out on a sunny day, seeing the light come through the sheet. And it's as the chi and the energies and the energy centers really open and are allowed to freely commingle, it's very common that the experience becomes luminous. And I would consider that light to be a sort of nimitta or sign of energy flow. There are somatic feelings of it. And then also the inner sound or the sound of silence is like another sign that the energy has started to flow strongly enough or in enough volume or throughput that it starts to have a sound to it.
Yeah, the alarm clock of awakening, or I've heard someone refer to the sound of silence as the auditory equivalent of the nimitta of light. For those who don't know what the nada sound is, Ajahn Amaro has written a wonderful book called Inner Listening about it, and just a subtle hissing or ringing you can find below the auditory landscape if you become sensitized to it, and it's always there, and you can give it attention, but it's also maybe the sound of chi, almost. Would you have anything more to say about the nada sound? Because it's a very powerful sign.
Yeah, I mean, we would have to do a whole nother talk if we really want to, but some short things. It does seem to have some correlation with the sound of chi. And then as that chi is not only the chi of our body, but we start to exchange and circulate with the universe, the sound of the universe and the sound of not just our little kind of self-contained experience, but of the whole. And then that sound is like an alarm clock. And if we, as if we are in a dream, listen to that sound in the dream and just follow it to its source, something amazing happens.
And if people can't find the sound of silence, what would you recommend they do?
So there are some kind of tricks we can use. So we can submerge ourselves in water. We can go in a bathtub or a pool underwater. Another way some people can find it is by plugging the ears or putting in earplugs, or going in a dark, really dark space, and then allow your senses, keep your eyes open and allow your senses to go out as if they're trying to collect information. A lot of meditation methods or energy methods, qigong as well, if we just sort of reach a comfortable threshold with it, that sound may present itself.
Yeah, I find similarly, I use earplugs sometimes in noisy spaces, although Ajahn Amaro, for example, can hear it over power tools. And in Thailand, the cicadas are almost the exact frequency of the sound of silence. It's terrible, so you do have to often use earplugs there, or that's helpful. But I find it's a very powerful supplement. I want to just speak about other supplementary or auxiliary practices which this can work with. So one is, we spoke about how sometimes after you've steamed the body a few times, you can use it almost like a mist of gasoline and light it on fire with a certain perception if you want that fuel. But yeah, would you speak to metta practice in these terms and to, recollection of the Buddha, if either of those fit in here at all?
Okay. In essence, it's a lot like, my experience is a lot like what you've described, when the fuel, whether it was wise fuel born from stillness or whether it was restlessness or obsession or something that was present, once it gets melted down by the dantian practice, it takes this sort of neutralized form where we can feel there's some sort of energy or something here, but it no longer has the taste of what it was. And it then is sort of a neutral vehicle for whatever shows up. And that means if we lose our temper in that moment, it can flare up as anger. But also, if we practice metta or one of the Brahmavihara practices, or we practice something like Buddhanusati, a recollection of the Buddha, the feeling, also something like gratitude or forgiveness, the feeling that gets evoked can kind of perpetuate through all of that fuel and flavor it with that. And this, I think, for a lot of people might be something really useful if your practice has felt dry or like it's intellectual, but I can't feel it. I feel like I'm pretending, etc. Because it's a very visceral, like felt thing. It's not an idea that we're talking about here. So we do the practice of breaking down what would be unskillful or one of the poisons, and then we allow it to reach its neutral state, and then we switch gears to something noble, maybe compassion or friendliness. Maybe we could start with something very simple like looking at a picture of a baby or a pet that we love and just feel that and let it just kind of go out in our body so there's a body experience of it. And then it allows us to not just intellectually go into something that seems like a noble practice, but it allows us to actually feel it physically and energetically. With Buddhanusati or Buddha practices, this can take the form of rapture, piti, it can take the form of inspiration, of deep gratitude. But again, it can actually sort of go through the whole body and course through us, instead of just a little pinprick or a little spot that it's contained to.
Thank you. I've really felt this is one of the key reasons for people to understand the Awakening Alchemy is because, we hear about all these noble practices, but this provides a fuel which really you can, at some point, turn to whatever direction seems wholesome. And, I think of it often as once you have the mind as a white cloth, you can drop on a bead of golden dye and it just pervades out and, sensitizing to the mind, gladdening the mind in the Anapanasati Sutta. Well, we've covered a lot of ground, Jason. Is there anything else that you think it would be meaningful to touch on in terms of this practice, its edges, its kind of horizons and more on?
Maybe just something that I can bring over from Mahayana Buddhist language that can be helpful for people practicing the Dhamma is it's more overtly talked about in Mahayana Buddhist texts, the concept of capacity, and that beings have different capacities. We have different, and that's just a word for lots of ways we could say that, different karmic propensities or different obstacles in our lives and things. And so, of course, certain practices are going to come to us better on one day than another, and also for some of us much easier than others. And that can be really difficult for a lot of us because we can feel like it's not fair. I really need this metta practice and I'm an angry person. I can't do it or something. We're not stuck there. And two of the biggest ways I've discovered for working with raising capacity, one is merit and meritorious action, ethical action. I think that's why the root of a lot of Buddhist stuff is sila and ethical behavior. It is also in old Taoist practices. And that really stacks the deck in our favor that we may open in ways that we probably wouldn't normally. And then the other is energetically developing greater capacity. So these practices, that is in essence their main function or how they're employed in the system of practice that I teach and kind of do myself is they've really helped open my heart center. They've helped to drop my coping mechanisms and my guarding. They've helped me realize things that intellectually I knew, but I didn't feel. And if we just open to that and then we practice them and we let that unfolding happen in its own way, on its own time, our other Buddhist practices we might find come more alive for some of the reasons that we've already mentioned. And when we combine that and merit and maybe willingness to practice renunciation and willingness to forgive and explore release, they all support each other, and it starts to get easier and easier and easier and more tangible.
I think we spoke about what I thought were the limitations of samatha, samadhi practice as brought to the West, and Alice Gopnik, who is a professor at the University of Berkeley, identified several different modes of consciousness. There's spotlight awareness, which focuses on one object, and so many samatha, breath-based practices were framed that way, of just breath at the tip of the nose and just that. Or lantern awareness, which is completely open, very much right brain, sampajanya. Sort of whatever arises in the moment is completely appropriate, maybe resonant with certain non-dual approaches of non-effort, but there is effort to be made. But she identified a third type of awareness, and I find both of those are limited. A third kind of awareness that manifests very differently in the mind, and that's play awareness. Mm-hmm. And yet, when you take, moderns so accustomed to thinking and tell them, you can't play with some of these practices, which are, it's like giving a kid a wooden block and telling him to play with it. Like, what do you do with the breath at the tip of the nose or a one-word mantra? But with these paradigms, there is, it's playing an instrument. It's firing furnaces. It's there's a real element of interest which can drive the practice, and it can be engaged and fun and interesting and enjoyable in a way that I feel like leads people beyond that impasse. And I think play awareness is the correct paradigm in a lot of cases. It dances between spotlight and lantern. So for giving people more of the chords and the sheet music and all that, just very much appreciate your gift to the Dharma here, Jason. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
You may have been the longest interview I have ever done, Jason.
Same here.
Well, let's bow to the Buddha.
Okay.